Coming. Okay. Okay, let's see. Yeah. There you go.
Let me see it. Hello there. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hello?
We cannot hear you, Robin. Can you hear me, Michelle?
I can hear you, Miguel, if that's of any use. Dave Robertson here.
Hi, Dave. How are you doing? I don't think we are getting feedback from the room.
No, I think they must have. I suspect they've not got their microphone working.
Sure.
Can anyone hear what's going on in the room? Can anyone
No.
hear us?
No.
No. I can hear you guys, but I can't hear the room.
Yeah, same here.
I wonder if they can hear us.
I tried to scream at Robin, but he didn't hear me, so I'm gonna say no.
Will they notice the messages?
Can people online hear?
Yes, we can hear you now, Robin.
Okay.
Hey now, fantastic.
So I'll have to leave this machine here. This is very complicated. Today's talk, Michelle Williams has to be in clinic. So she can't be here to speak, but she's coming online at some stage, we hope soon. So we've got this rather clunky hybrid audience, but also hybrid speakers. So as I say, Michelle Williams and Danny Reuter, Michelle in Edinburgh, Danny in London, are both involved in the struggle to implement AI and to evaluate it and to make sure this flaky technology is performing reliably and effectively. And we know them, we should thank CAS for setting up this link, because CAS has been working with them on an attempt to produce standards to control and monitor and validate and guarantee the effective performance of diagnostic AI, which turns out to be one of the critical problems. So I won't say anything more about their biography, because if you're here, you've already had their biography, and I think we should leave the time to hear from our hugely experienced speakers. Danny, I think you're going first.
No, I think Michelle's going to go first.
Oh, sorry. Has she arrived yet?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Can you?
Right, Michelle, then I will switch off my mic and put everything through to you. Yes.
Michelle, I think your internet
Okay,
is
Michelle,
quite
over to
slow.
you.
Can you hear me? Maybe. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes.
In the
Yes.
room, can you hear me okay? Danny and Robin, can you hear me? You can. Excellent. Okay, so hello. My name is Michelle Williams. I'm a professor of cardiovascular imaging at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm a radiologist here at the Royal Infirmary, and I'm duty radiologist today, which is why I'm online rather than in person. So a good hybrid event here. I'm also Associate Director of the British Heart Foundation Data Science Centre, and I've got a big interest in AI in cardiovascular imaging, in radiology, and in medicine in general. And the reason I got involved in all of this is because there's a huge potential for AI in healthcare. And it's not just doing fun things like drawing circles around nodules on scans, it's doing everything. So identifying patients who benefit from being seen by a doctor, looking at risk factors, screening, getting patients into hospital, helping patients find the right time that fits them with the right doctor. All of these aspects of actually just getting people to hospital. And then once you're at the hospital, there's huge needs for everything that we do to be improved, automated, made faster and more efficient and better for patient care. And that ranges from things like transcribing during clinic attendances, summarizing information, identifying drugs that would be good or bad for patients. And then in my area of imaging, looking for disease of a huge number of different types. Every aspect of my job could be made better by better IT technology and better AI and machine learning tools in particular. And then once the patient's left the hospital, there's all sorts of things to do with administration, follow-up, identifying side effects for medications, huge number of things once the patient has left the hospital before they come back again. So at every point in the clinical pathway, there is the potential for machine learning and AI to transform the things we do. And we're starting to see a lot of these things coming in the research world and some appearing in clinical practice. In my world in radiology, we have lung nodule detection software, we have cardiac contours being done by machine learning tools. And all of these are speeding up the things that we do anyway, but also giving us new things to do as well, identifying new diseases, new things on scans. So that's a sort of big sort of summary of the potential for AI in healthcare. We're going to talk more about the downsides in a few minutes as well. It's not all rosy. And one of the important things is that before developing or bringing into clinical, research or production, AI tool or machine learning tool, we need to think about what is the actual clinical need? What's the problem that we're going to solve? We don't want just to draw around circles for the good of our health. We want to actually make a benefit to patients. So at the center of everything that we're thinking about when it comes to AI and machine learning is actually, can we actually do some benefits for patients? So I'm going to hand over to Danny now, who's going to talk about how we go through implementing these things and some of the potential issues that come up with AI tools in clinical practice and the real sort of reasons that these standards came together.
And we just have The mic's gone off again. Can you hear? No, let's turn the volume down again.
It's an echo.
Okay, that's right. That's good. That's good. That's good.
Yep.
Yeah, you can hear now. Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear? Okay. Yep. Great. Great.
You're going to have to speak very loudly because you turn the speakers off.
Yeah. Yeah. I can speak loudly. Don't worry. Okay. Can you hear me at the back there? Chap at the back there. Right. It's good enough for me. And I'm sorry. Normally I'd be walking up and down. Yeah. But I have to stand here. Otherwise they can't see me. Yeah. So it's you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So just bear with me. So my name's Danny Reuter. I'm currently employed as the Artificial Intelligence Clinical Lead at the Guy's Cancer Centre at Guy's and St Thomas's in London. I'm actually so I know nothing. I'm not an artificial intelligence scientist. I'm not even a cancer doctor, and I work in the cancer centre. My background is in public health, and public health research, and then as a director of public health latterly. I got involved in AI when I was in my public health job working with Guy's Cancer Centre, and we started by trying to validate IBM Watson for oncology. And it was as a result of that experience with Watson, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that unhappy experience with Watson, that I ended up working in the cancer centre, because the chief of cancer at the time, when we started that project with Watson, he said, look, I'm getting approached every week by AI companies, and they're coming to me making these grandiose promises and claims about what their tech can do, with no evidence whatsoever that it actually does what it says on the tin. So basically, I was brought in as the AI clinical lead to help the cancer centre make sense of all these AI products that they were being bombarded with, to answer the simple question, do they do what they say on the tin? To translate that from lay speak, really what we were trying to do was establish the safety of these products with cancer patients, the cost effectiveness of the product. Does it deliver value? Value defined as the outcomes that matter for patients divided by pounds. Yep. And is it ethical? Safety, cost effectiveness, and ethics. Yep. Evidence-based medicine. So, we can be critical of AI companies and where AI is at the moment in healthcare in terms of an evidence base, and we invoke evidence-based medicine, and we invoke international guidelines about best practice as examples of what good evidence looks like. Okay. But actually, when you pick away at evidence-based medicine, it's not quite as evidence-based as you'd like to think. Yeah, for all sorts of reasons, but I haven't got time to go into them. But just to give you, an example, I looked. So Nature published a paper, I think in 2015, where they looked at the 4 most popular medicines, drugs in healthcare globally. Yep. Most popular by volume of sales. Yep. And they looked at how effective they actually were.
research.
So, the number one most popular drug in the world. Any idea what it might be and what it might be for? Nope. I was quite surprised. Azipiprazole for schizophrenia. So by sales volume, it's the most popular drug in the world. Only works for 1 in 4 people who take it. Second most popular drug in the world, I'm taking it, for my heartburn. Esomeprazole, yeah, a proton pump inhibitor that you take for reflux. Only works for 1 in 20 people that take it. That's the second most popular drug in the world. 1 in 20 people actually get a clinical benefit from taking it. Luckily, I'm one of them. I'm the 1 in 20. So, you know, even an evidence base for drugs and for conventional surgical procedures, which is based on systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials, doesn't necessarily, just because there's a strong evidence base, doesn't necessarily mean that the drug does what it says on the tin for the patient in front of you. And that's, you know, if you think about it, that's because randomized controlled trials are, which is the kind of gold standard for evidence, is a bit of a blunderbuss tool for evaluating effectiveness, because it's really looking at average improvements in a group of patients, isn't it? Yeah. You know, so when everyone gets excited that a new drug has a 10% reduction in mortality compared with the old drug, sounds amazing. 10%. You know, that would definitely go through nice as a drug that's recommended for use in the NHS. But what that means is that on average it reduces mortality by 10%. But what that means in practice is that for some of those people, it won't improve their mortality at all. For a few of them, they might actually be worse off. But for many of them, they'll be better off, and on average, the mortality rate is reduced by 10%. So, you know, that's the kind of sand on which the evidence-based temple, is built. When you look at medical devices, the evidence base is even weaker. You know, people think because a device gets FDA approval in the United States or CE approval in Europe, you think, oh, it must have a very, very robust and persuasive evidence base. But that's not true. The bar for getting CE approval, FDA approval, is actually not that high. It's improved in recent years. But it's quite shocking, actually, when you look at some of the medical devices that have got FDA approval and just how little evidence there is for their effective. They're safe, although not all safe. I mean, famously, breast implants made from industrial grade silicone was approved, and you know, until the scandal broke. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's safe, but it's generally safe. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to deliver value. Okay. When you look at software as a medical device and AI as a medical device, then you really have got a very sparse evidence base. Okay, so a real challenge, I think, in the next few years is going to be to develop standards, validation standards for what good looks like, that AI product developers can comply with, and the standards landscape is evolving very quickly. The regulatory landscape, which obviously sits alongside standards, but the regulatory landscape is playing catch up, and it is catching up quite fast, but it's still slightly behind the evolution of AI, which is not surprising because AI is evolving at such a pace that I don't think even medicine can't keep up with it. Certainly, doctors can't keep up with it. So there's definitely a need for some agreed standards on what looks like a safe, effective, and ethical AI product, and that's standards that can be used to audit a product, either before it comes on the market or when it's being developed or even after it's come onto the market, so that people who are buying that product can at least be reassured that it's complied with certain standards, which currently don't exist, apart from the one that we developed, that Michelle and I were involved in developing, which was published 2 weeks ago by the British Standards Institute, which is the oldest standards authority in the world, the very first. So before I kind of hand back to Michelle, because we're going to now talk about a little bit more about these standards, but just to give you a salutary tale of what happens when there's a vacuum of evidence, because when there's a vacuum of evidence, that vacuum gets filled with marketing hype. Yeah. Very quickly gets filled with marketing hype, which can be very dangerous and an enormous waste of money. Yeah. So with the way I initially got involved in AI as a non-AI scientist and worked at the Cancer Centre was when IBM Watson came to Guy's and St Thomas's offering us this sexy new toy called Watson for Oncology, which was based on machine learning algorithms trained by cancer doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. One of, if not the, well, MD Anderson in Texas would dispute, but Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York say that they're the best cancer hospital in America, but so does MD Anderson in Texas. Both had unfortunate experiences with Watson, actually, for different reasons, but Memorial Sloan Kettering, they trained Watson to make treatment recommendations for patients with cancer. Yep. Whether the patient should have chemotherapy or radiotherapy or surgery, what type of chemotherapy, which drugs they should have. And they came to Guy's and St Thomas's trying to sell us this product. So this is one of the very first products to enter the healthcare market. And you remember there was a huge a huge amount of publicity around Watson. Do you remember? Particularly, which was all started when it beat the humans in the quiz game, in the US quiz game Jeopardy. Yeah. So really, this new dawn of machine learning AI really was conceived initially outside of academia as a marketing exercise, really, by IBM initially, because they were losing ground to Google and Apple and the new kids on the block. And they were looking for something to win back their market share and to win back shareholder value. And they were looking for something that could do what they did with Deep Blue when it beat Garry Kasparov at chess. Do you remember? Yeah. So they developed Watson, and Watson was phenomenally successful. It used a little bit of machine learning, a bit of NLP, bit of rules-based expert system, a lot of data, and a lot of computational power, and it beat like the all-time quiz champion in Jeopardy in the quiz game. And it's much harder to win a quiz game than it is to beat a computer to beat a human at chess. Much harder. And so they wanted to sell us Watson for Oncology. It was ridiculously expensive, and it had no evidence base. And we said we're not interested. We said, you can pay us to evaluate it if you want, but we're not going to pay you to use it. So they went away, and they came back about 18 months later and paid us to evaluate Watson for Oncology. Okay, very specific use case in breast cancer. Now, the Watson story, of which we kind of got embroiled in, it followed the hype cycle, which is in the marketing world. Apparently, it's a very well documented, particularly around technology. Yeah, where new technology comes along, and then there's this massive peak of expectation. Yeah, and if it's a company, its share value goes through the roof, and everybody wants a piece of it. Yeah, and then there's this vertiginous drop. This peak of disillusionment when everybody says this is a bunch of crap, doesn't do anything that it said it did. Yeah. And then after a couple of years, it kind of picks up again. People start working out how to get some value out of it. and it reaches a kind of a plateau for kind of value and productivity, which is normally way below the initial expectation. Yeah, that's kind of like the trajectory of the hype cycle of new technology, and that applies to AI. And you know, Watson came to us initially at the peak of expectation. They hadn't sold anything in Europe, very little in America, mainly India and Indonesia, a bit in Korea, and there was a lot of and then the disillusionment started. And the irony is that we evaluated Watson for Oncology for a very specific use case to see if we could use it to triage cancer patients away from the multidisciplinary team meeting. So in the UK, every patient with cancer has to be reviewed at they call an MDT meeting, where a whole bunch of highly paid professionals, doctors, nurses, get together and they make a recommendation on the best treatment for every single patient with cancer in the UK. Every day, year in, year out. The NHS cannot cope with that workflow. And, you know, sometimes, on average, these MDTs are spending less than 2 minutes talking about each patient. So, you know, so there's very little meaningful discussion going on. So we look to see whether Watson or something like Watson could take the simple patients, make a recommendation. And if that recommendation was the same as the MDT, then why bother to send it to the MDT? So they could go straight back for treatment, and then the MDT could just discuss the more complicated patients or get more patients through. There's a massive backlog, especially with COVID. Anyway, it worked pretty well, actually. When we evaluated it, it looked as if it could triage about 40% of our breast cancer patients away from the MDT. So you could reduce the MDT by 40%, which is a massive saving in time. The opportunity cost, those doctors could all be seeing more patients or treating more patients or in surgery and theatre. But IBM took a strategic decision, having spent well over $1 billion investing in Watson, closed down the entire product range, and then sold Watson Health and divested itself. And 2 years before, the chief exec, the CEO of IBM, was proclaiming Watson was going to be what could rescue the company and turn the company around. And that has been a salutary tale for AI developers in the healthcare space. But because AI is moving at such a pace, the world has moved on so quickly, it's just in the space of 2-3 years. And we're now in the world of generative AI and the kind of machine deep learning that is now being used, particularly in imaging. And I'll hand you back to Michelle to carry on with the story in relation to some of the work that she's been doing, Michelle.
Thanks, Danny. Can you hear me in the room?
You have to just do the
So you might need to change over.
Is that no? Okay, that's good. Except I have to switch that one off. Okay.
Can you hear me in the room? Fantastic. Thanks, Danny. It's a really fascinating tale. I really enjoy hearing about IBM Watson, because I remember being at RSNA when IBM Watson was going to be the big thing. There were big stands, big meetings, lots of discussion and excitement about it, and then 2 years later it was gone. And it just shows that, as well as all the things we're talking about, getting things into clinical practice, we have to think about the aspects of the companies around them as well. When we're talking about making AI safe and sustainable and ethical, all of these things are actually good for companies, not just challenges for companies. These are the things that actually make these products work, and they need to start from the development phase. So we've talked about the potential for AI at every point in the patient pathway, and the need for identifying clinical needs for making AI tools. And I can assure you there are no shortage of potential clinical needs for anyone who has an idea for a machine learning tool. I'm involved in machine learning from a variety of different angles, from the developing, early stage, making new tools, particularly for imaging and cardiovascular disease, a variety of different types. Testing people's tools that have been made in the UK and elsewhere around the world, similar to Danny, people who are early on in making a machine learning tool for a particular need. We help them put together the evidence, test them out, see if they work in different populations, particularly external validation, which is really important for any machine learning tools. And then also using and helping advise people who are buying machine learning tools for the NHS, lung nodule software, cardiac software. There's a lot of softwares that we use as part of our everyday clinical work that have AI and machine learning built in. So I get to see from across the spectrum many of the different challenges, and some of them Danny's hit on there. The issues of generalizability, applicability in populations, bias. We hear there's lots of cautionary tales about machine learning tools being trained and tested in one population that applied in a totally different population where it doesn't work. Accuracy and safety, and the patient needs to be at the heart of all of the things we do. And the standard ethical principles that Danny's mentioned are something that are just as important in developing and making AI for healthcare as in any other part of healthcare. And then we have cost and legal and responsibility aspects that we have to think about. Keeping the patient at the center of all of the things that we're doing really does help with trying to guide us through this challenging area. And one of the reasons I got involved with the BSI standard that we're going to talk about is that there was a gap in need, both from when I had my developer and team lead for developers hat on, how should we put together a machine learning tool that's ultimately hopefully going to get through the research stage and into clinical practice? What do we need to do as developers? What do we need to think about? And also with my clinical hat on, similar to Danny, people coming, this is an amazing tool, it's going to save you hours, it's going to transform your patient's health, sign on the dotted line and give us lots of money. Where's the evidence for that? What do I need to check? If I'm someone buying an AI tool, I'm in a very fortunate position because I know a lot about AI tools. I know a lot about the market. I know a lot about imaging, but many of the people who are buying these tools in hospitals throughout the UK may be in a small district general hospital. They may be the only breast radiologist. They may be the only radiographer who's in charge of purchasing this particular thing. They may be one person with no expertise who've been asked to bring in this new service for the hospital. So having a framework that helps from both sides seemed to me a really important thing. So helping developers and people thinking about making AI tools, helping early stage companies put together packages of information for the various regulatory approvals, making sure that they've done all the things they need to do, but also at the other end, the patient facing end, the clinical end, helping people who are buying or using or evaluating new tools. And there was a real gap in the available regulatory standards. So when it comes to AI and machine learning, if you type into Google AI machine learning standards regulation framework, you will find a lot of documents. There are WHO UNESCO standards for ethics. There are European standards for AI ethics being developed. In Scotland, we're one of the first people to have a sort of put together plan at a sort of governmental level about AI in the whole society, not just in healthcare. And then practically every medical society that's around has some form of statement about AI and machine learning. The ESC, the ASR, the RSNA, the SCCT, these are all ones that I've been involved in helping. But all of them say very general things so far. Sensible things and things we need to do, keeping the patient at the heart of what we're doing, thinking about ethics, thinking about evidence, thinking about costs. They're all very sensible. But from the point of view of the person who's trying to buy a software tool or actually make a software tool, having an auditable standard that goes through the things that you should do step by step, taking you through the entire process, talking about data sets, model development, training, testing, all of these different aspects would be a really valuable thing. And that's why I got involved in the standard, because I saw that it would be a useful thing from both sides of the equation. So I'll maybe pass back to Danny now to talk about the standard itself, because it very much led on from work that he did in Guy's and Tommy's to start the process of looking at how we evaluate these tools.
Switch that on and then great. Can you still hear me online, Michelle? Yep, brilliant. Okay. So rewind to early 2019 when we first started. We kind of halfway through the Watson project, and we were trying to set up an AI clinical evaluation capability at Guy's Cancer Centre. So first thing we did was look around to see, okay, where's the framework, where's the validation framework that we can use, you know, in the kind of thing that Michelle was describing. And as Michelle said, there were lots of good examples of work going on. So NICE was developing some evidence standards for how you would test AI. The Alan Turing Institute was starting to develop some criteria. The FDA in America was starting to think about standards, but there was no consensus, there was no international framework, there was not even a national framework that you could use. So what we did is we basically did a mix and match, took the best bits from all these different published works, and then we produced a draft framework. And then we started using that, but then we showed it to the British Standards Institute, and they were already starting to think about developing some standards. So they took the draft framework and they pulled together a very impressive group of people. And Cass was heavily involved. Cass was kind of project managing for a lot of this process, which took, I think, 2 years. It took us in the end, 2.5 years. So it took 2.5 years to develop these standards. And so imagine, like Michelle said, imagine that you're a small cancer hospital. Well, any hospital. You're a small district general hospital, and you know somebody's coming to you with what looks like a promising piece of AI technology that you think, yeah, I can see how that could actually help. It's going to cost me £100,000 a year if I want to buy it. What do I do? Well, what you can do now, 2.5 years later, it was published, I think, 2 weeks ago, is you can say, do you comply with the BSI standards? And if they say yes, then what that means is that some independent auditor has taken that product, has taken the BSI standards, and has gone through each of the criteria and has made an assessment about, does it meet that criteria, yes or no? Does it meet that criterion, yes or no? And then, so you've got a framework to audit a piece of AI technology in healthcare, and you know, it's not infallible, it's highly subjective, but it's definitely, I think, and I think Michelle would agree, it's definitely a quantum leap forward in terms of having some framework for validation. So I'll give an example. So if you think about it, there's a pipeline you would go through to develop AI. Yeah. So you start with inception. You start with thinking up the idea. You know, wouldn't it be good if we could develop an AI algorithm that could do this? Yeah. Then you develop it. Then you validate it. Then you implement it in a real world setting. Yeah. And then, you know, it's in the market, it's being used, then you've got to monitor it. Yeah. So if you think about it, you can develop some criteria for each of those steps about what should you be doing at inception, what should you be doing when you're developing the AI, what should you be doing when you're validating the AI, yeah? What should you be doing if you're implementing it? What should you be doing if you're going to monitor it once it's being used? And that's exactly what we did, which is why it took 2.5 years, because we got a set of questions and criteria that you've got to answer for each of those steps. Yeah. So what do they look like? I'll give you an example. I'll just pick a couple out. So I'll go through the inception stage, go to the development stage. Okay. So you come up with an idea, and unfortunately, most companies that come up with these ideas, the ideas are generated by AI scientists based on what the AI can do, not by clinicians based on what they need, or patients based on what they need. Yep. So so some of the early criteria are about: have you asked the patient? Have you demonstrated there's a real clinical need? But I'm going to move forward to development. So even at the development stage, we've got criteria here around stakeholder involvement. Stakeholder involvement, what does that mean? It sounds like a buzzword, but actually it's quite important. What it means is that if you're an AI developer, that you shall document, so this is reading straight from the standard here, you shall document how stakeholders were identified and provide a comprehensive record of all stakeholder engagement during the development of your product. And you've got to be able to show that documentation. So example, okay, so a company is developing an AI tool that uses natural language processing, yeah, to read published academic papers that identify driver mutations, that's changing the DNA sequence of genes that can cause cells to become cancerous, yeah. And then it also reads the literature, which is vast, yeah, vast literature, for effective drug treatments in patients with those driver mutations. So in other words, you're trying to identify actionable mutations where this patient could probably do with this drug because they've got this gene which responds to that drug. Yeah. Now, how does that happen at the moment? You have a thing called a molecular tumor board, where again, a bit like an MDT, the MTB, they're meeting every week. They've got whole genome sequence, or they've got a panel of genes from the patient that they're considering, and then they try and identify if there's any actionable mutations. And they do all that manually, and they've got people employed to search databases and try and find the latest literature, which is coming out every week. So if you're going to develop a tool that can do that using a machine learning algorithm, which you can, I mean, AI is good at that kind of thing, you've got to document that you've worked closely with the people who are on those molecular tumor boards. Yeah, it's common sense, really, but you'd be surprised how often this doesn't happen. And ideally, talk to some patients as well, particularly ones who are getting genetic counselling, to see what they think. Yeah, so that's an example of a standard. I'll show you, I'll move forward a bit, give you another couple of examples. Yeah, so this is still developing. So you're still developing the AI. So this is about ethics. It's about ethics. So if you're developing an AI product, you should document why the data that you're using to train your algorithm was collected in the first place. Yeah. Was that data collected specifically because you were developing this AI, or was it collected for something else? You can see where we're going with this, can't you? What was the context in which that data was collected? And what's the relevance to the purpose and the context of its originally intended use? So you can see how you could have originally collected some data for research, for a research ethics approved study, and you know, it might have had nothing to do with the AI product, but the AI company has seen, oh, there's some really good data there we could use, but there has to be a clear ethical governance process that's been followed. And Google got in big trouble with this, with DeepMind got in big trouble with this a few years ago with the Royal Free, where they got access to patient data, which I don't think was anonymized. So, you know, even the biggest, most well-funded companies can go astray. You could say it wasn't entirely their fault, although you'd think they would have thought of that, because no framework exists or existed at that time. I'll give you one more example. I'll move forward in the pipeline because there are, I think, 38 standards in total. Let me see, I'll find another one. Yeah, validation. So, you know, you've developed the product. Now you want to build an evidence base, not just to get CE approval, FDA approval, but to actually convince the doctors, the medical profession, the purchasers, people like Michelle, not in a research capacity, but you know, as a radiologist, that actually it's worth her hospital buying this product. Okay, where's the evidence that it actually is effective or cost effective? In other words, what's the impact on patient outcomes? Yeah. So if a company is going to try and develop that evidence base, they need to describe the methods that they used to assess the effectiveness of the product according to good practice guidelines. So what we're saying is there are some good standardized guidelines out there for how you do research in AI. If you want to do a validation study, there's Spirit AI guidelines, there's Consort AI guidelines. These are how you would report a clinical trial that is using it, that is doing an RCT of an AI product. So an example is you're developing a deep learning tool to identify pneumonia on a chest X-ray. Okay, and a study of diagnostic accuracy is being planned. Before designing the study, the researchers looked on the Equator Network website. So this is a research methodology website, and they identified that the STARD, I don't even know what STARD stands for, but it's what does it stand for? Standards for Reporting Diagnostic Accuracy Studies, STARD, would be the most appropriate for their study. Now, if they can show some evidence that they have actually used they've used the STARD guidelines, and it's quite easy to provide that evidence because you can look at the criteria in the STARD guidelines. So our standards is making reference to other accepted, recognised standards in not just AI development, but also, you know, in healthcare research and in medical device standards as well. And so you can see how it'd be really interesting, because this is new, it'd be really interesting to see if you took some of the, and there are a lot out there at the moment, the FDA has approved 500 AI algorithms so far, most of them since 2015. It's running at about 100 a year. That's getting FDA approval. And there's a lot of AI used in healthcare that doesn't need FDA or CE approval, you know, for automation, which is probably of less concern with regard to safety and effectiveness and ethics. But you know, if you're making diagnoses, if you're making treatment recommendations, if you're doing that kind of clinical, making those kinds of clinical decisions and predictions, then you're quite likely to need FDA or CE approval. It'd be really interesting to see if you applied these guidelines to what's already out there, how many of them would actually pass. I'm guessing a lot of them would fail. I don't know how many, I don't know what percentage, but I reckon it'd be quite high. Michelle, would you say a lot of them would fail?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'll hand you back to Michelle. And I think we probably should take some.
Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Yeah, I agree with that, Danny. And the thing I like about these standards is we spent a lot of time making each of the clauses very specific. So this supplier shall describe the methods used to assess the effectiveness of the product according to good clinical practice guidelines that you've just described there. It's very specific, and you can tick yes or no as to whether you've done that or not. It provides a list of things that everyone should be doing, which seem like common sense, but it's really easy to forget when you've got so many things to do when you're developing AI models. It provides a list of things that we can do, that we can tick, and then at the other end, it also provides a list of things that we can just tick. Yes, we've done it. No, we haven't. I think up until recently, a lot of the AI tools that are approved by various different people don't meet all of these things, even though these seem like common sense and should be done to us. But I think going forward, we'll see a big improvement in what people are providing as evidence that for their AI models along these lines, because NICE is interested in this, MHRA is interested in this, the FDA are interested in this. People around the world are really interested in this standard because it is the first auditable standard. Yes, we should go to questions now, Danny, but there's just two other things on our list of bullet points. One was, what are the limitations of it? And from my point of view, this is the first one. There is no other standard like this around the world. So the first limitation is that, well, there might be things that we've missed that need added in, and AI is moving really fast. And so we need to start thinking about, well, what's the process going to be for updating this standard, making the next standard, because we need this to keep developing and changing and improving with time. There might also be things that we didn't get quite right. We spent hours and hours and hours phrasing each of these exactly like we thought was right, but perhaps there's things that need adapted and changed in the next version of the standard, which will only really become evident as we actually use it and see how it works in clinical practice. So if you are developing an AI tool, this is the time to have a look at this and start feeding into this process as a community rather than just everyone doing it separate, as a community, bringing together these ideas for the next standards. And going forward, we really do need to see how it actually works. Just like we really want AI tools to have evidence that they work, we need our standards to have evidence that they're useful for developers, for people who are using AI tools, for people who are selling AI tools, and for people who are buying AI tools. So we also need to develop an evidence base for the standard itself. So I'll hand back to you, Danny, and look forward to any questions or discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. So, whoops. Any questions? And I might have to then switch it on so that we can tell Michelle what the questions are.
So with the big companies making proprietary algorithms, they might not want to share the code that runs all of these algorithms. Do you guys consider, almost like forcing them to take their cards away from their chest and showing you guys that, like, not only can we validate it sort of post-op, but we have the code here and this is exactly how it runs?
Yeah. Michelle, you did hear that? Excellent. Okay. I'll give my answer first and then see if Michelle wants to add to it. We really struggled with this one. If we wanted to put into the standards that the code should be available for assessment, but we knew that we would never get that to happen. So I think the way we've worded the guidance, the standards are that you must make the methods available rather than the actual code itself. And that's probably as far as we can go really for the moment. Yeah. Michelle, anything you want to add to that?
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, I agree. Like, I am a huge fan of open source code, open science, and anything we can make available, we should make available. But we do have to accept that this is an industry, and it's very difficult to actually get things into clinical practice that don't have an industry behind them. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult. And so many of the things that are being purchased and used and made at the moment are from companies who want to retain some IP. But that doesn't mean that they can't tell us, as Danny described, about the methodology and about the data sets in more general summarized terms. And that aspect of summarized information, the standard does go into quite a lot of information. It asks you to describe about pre-processing of data, about optimization of parameters, about the data itself that you're using in summarized terms. Who is it in terms of ages and ethnicities and diversity aspects? So we asked as much as we could within what we thought was appropriate for people who have companies and have IP that they want to keep within companies themselves. So it's a really tricky one, that.
I'll just take you in a sec. But just to add that Siemens actually tried to block the standards from being published. So Siemens said we don't need these in the marketplace. You know, this is just going to hold up the deployment and use of AI in healthcare, which is going to damage patient care, and it's going to hold it back. But I think what they were really saying was, you know, we don't want to jump through your hoops. We want to get our stuff out there and sell as much as we can. So BSI, to their credit, pushed back on it, and they said, sorry, but you know, we don't think you're. They made a few kind of specific criticisms of the guidance of the standards, but BSI pushed back and said, well, no, but we think we've addressed all the issues for now. Obviously, there'll be another version coming out which will be improved once it's being used, but we don't think your criticisms are warranted, so we're going to publish.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting introduction to what's clearly a very important bit of work. I want to take you in a different direction, and you could say, not our problem, and that's fine. But one of the things about the deployment of AI in contexts where real impact on large numbers of human beings exists is that the question of responsibility arises. And real ordinary doctors, ordinary airline pilots, ordinary high school teachers, right, have to go through a rigorous and extended process of training and assessment before we let them do it.
Yeah.
And that means that people, patients, students, passengers, are willing to trust these people because they have to take responsibility for what they do.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure you know, the history of technology in medicine over the last 30 years is full of horror stories with arguments about responsibility in the case of failure.
Yeah.
So, specific question. Does this standard help, for instance, a hospital administrator saying, yeah, not only does it look like if we had this tool, our doctors would do a better job, but if there's a problem, it's not going to fall on us exclusively.
Yeah.
Does it help us establish when responsibility lies with the company?
Yeah. Michelle, did you hear that? Yeah. Do you want to? I'll do a quick answer, Michelle, and then I'll let you give a follow-up answer. So we have tried to address that in the standards. So in the deployment section, there are some standards about has the company undertaken any training of the end users, particularly clinicians, and can they document that they've appropriately trained the end users? And in the validation section, there's some criteria around have they demonstrated that the product that they may have validated in one context, whether it continues to show the same level of performance over time with different operators in different hospitals in different parts of the world. So it starts to address some of those issues. And there's even a section around automation-induced complacency, where once it's deployed, I think this is in the monitoring section, where once it's deployed and people start getting kind of comfortable with using AI, do they get complacent and become over-reliant on the decisions that the AI is making, which could kind of lead to potentially, especially if the AI is drifting off, could result in actually substandard care. So we've tried to address it, but I don't think. I think regulatory bodies probably have a greater role to play, and then there's the whole legal area around responsibility and who gets sued, which is a whole other ballpark. I'll see what Michelle has to say.
Before you do, because the very last thing you said, have you actually established that anybody is willing to act as an auditor in this system? Because I wouldn't, because I couldn't get liability insurance for it. Because it's exactly the auditor who's going to be, the company is going to think, there's the cutout. We passed the validation.
Yeah.
There's a problem. It's not us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think BSI is talking to a whole number. There's a lot of people putting their hands up, a lot of auditors that want to take it on, but maybe they'll get the companies to sign a kind of a disclaimer before they agree to do the audit. I'll hand over to Michelle as well.
Thanks,
Michelle.
Danny. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. So there's two aspects to that question, and this is a really important question. The first is that does this standard help with the person who is buying the tool to think that this will make patient care safer? And as Danny's explained, there's a lot of places throughout the standard where there are things built in to help with that. It's all about improving care. But the second part of the standard, which is the more important one that you ask again there, is about who is responsible for the AI tool. And this is a really important question. And at the moment, we do not have a definitive answer anywhere in the world about this. The UK at the moment, all of these tools are being used as advice for doctors. So the doctor is the one who has the ultimate responsibility and choice, and the doctor will be the one who gets sued when it goes wrong. We don't yet have any big cases in either Scottish or English law around this. And really, until we do, we don't yet know where this is going to fall, and no one is standing up saying, let's regulate this and share responsibility or delegate responsibility or do responsibility in X, Y, and Z way. Chatting to the US, to the FDA, and to various lawyers in the US that I've worked with, they similarly are in a similar position. At the moment, AI is advisory, and the doctor or the healthcare practitioner is the one that takes the ultimate responsibility, or within a healthcare system, the responsibility is delegated from the health board to certain individuals. Responsibility is delegated for certain circumstances, for certain things, to radiographers or nurses or secretaries. And then ultimately the responsibility becomes the NHS boards. So that aspect of who takes responsibility when things go wrong is really widely debated amongst doctors as well as AI professionals as well, because if the AI tells me something and I say, no, the AI is wrong, and it turns out that I was wrong, versus the AI tells me something and I say the AI is right, whereas actually the AI is wrong, those are two really interesting things as to whose fault is it. So that's why all current AI tools are advisory and none are specifically devices yet, but that will come fast. And when something is a medical device, there's a whole pile of hoops that you have to go through that are much more complicated, that are similar for pacemakers as they would be a software that's advising something. So until there are some big lawsuits and regulation is forced in this area, at the moment, everyone's just taking a step back and saying, well, we're not going to make that decision. And it is one that will have to be made at some point. So I have lots of thoughts on that one, but I'll move on. There's actually a question online, I don't know if you can see it, about should we be restricting which training data can be used? Data access is one of the biggest constraints for AI in healthcare, in their opinion, and I totally agree with that. But they've also written the important thing. It's not about restricting what data should be used, it's about ensuring that the data is used with consideration to data protection, data privacy, de-identification. In the UK, in Scotland, that means getting ethical approval for the use of unconsented data and either Caldecott Guardian approval or patient and public benefit approval for the use of patient information without consent. So there are processes to use this data, and it's just a case of we need to know that that process was followed, and it's different in every place in the world. It's different in England, it's different in the Europe, etc. So it's not about restricting access, it's about ensuring that whatever the local regional requirements are were followed by the developer to use that data and that they had the appropriate permissions. So I'll pass back to you, Danny.
Thanks very much, Michelle. I think we're kind of over time now, so and I know people are starting to go to other classes, so I think I'll probably wrap up. And I think big thank you to Professor Michelle Williams. Yes.
That's been extraordinary. You've done very well managing the really complicated machinery for doing a hybrid online speaker and audience combination. And it's great that you came up and we've had a lovely conversation, and I'm sure we will stay in touch with you and explore these issues further. So this won't be the end of the discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there is a recording for people who want to catch up on what we've said, but let's thank them again in the normal way. Thank you.